class. Today we're going to be talking about obsessive compulsive disorder. One of the reasons why I'm talking about this right after anxiety disorders is that in previous versions of the DSM, OCD was actually listed as an anxiety disorder. For the DSM-5, it was actually pulled out and now is its own categorization, and it has all these related disorders here. And the reason for this is that while anxiety is a part of OCD, it's not the main component of it. So anxiety will maintain this disorder, and sometimes the group of disorders that are related to it. OCD and these disorders have a lot of similarities, such as the fact that there's preoccupations and repetitive behaviors that go along with them. So so in the DSM-5, OCD, which is what we're going to talk about in this class or in this lecture, is different and separate from all of these other disorders, but they have that preoccupation with something and repetitive behaviors. So trichotillomania, for example, is repetitive hair pulling. You will read more about this. Body dysmorphic disorder is when you are preoccupied with a certain part of your body that you think is unwanted or is flawed in some way. So somebody might think about feeling so embarrassed about the size of their nose that that's all they can think about is the size of their nose. And that gets in the way of doing things like, being social, for example. Hoarding disorder is when you actually get a lot of things and you are preoccupied with acquiring things and having them in your house, for example. If you've ever watched that show Hoarders, that is what hoarding looks like. Excoriation is all about skin picking. So this is picking your skin to the point of bleeding or having other problems associated with actually picking your skin. So you'll learn a little bit more about trichotillomania in your readings this week, but we're going to kind of skip over the other ones. So let's talk specifics about OCD. So OCD is having either obsessions or compulsions. So you don't technically need to have both in order to get this diagnosis. But oftentimes when we think about OCD, it's usually fear of germs, so obsessed about germs, and then having a compulsion to wash your hands. And while a lot of the times we talk about I'm so OCD because I always have to wash my hands afterwards, that is not what we're talking about. We are talking about intrusive thoughts. So things that are unwanted really could be very distressing for a person to have thoughts about germs, for example. And you're trying to ignore them or trying to not do things, but you feel compelled. You have to wash your hands. And we're not talking about washing them once. We're talking about washing them multiple times to the point where you might have cracked hands. You might have, you might do it for an excessive period of time. So, an hour-long hand washing session, for example. And that compulsion is in response to that obsession. So if you're trying to prevent sickness or a cold, you might have that compulsion to continuously wash your hands. So just personal experience of somebody that I knew, their hands were always red, always cracked, always bleeding because they could not stop themselves, literally couldn't stop themselves from repeatedly washing their hands. What we saw in our case study with Claire, for example, is she had the thoughts and urges and images of stabbing somebody or stabbing her siblings with a pencil. This wasn't something that she wanted to do, right? This was experienced as something very unwanted. I don't like this. It wasn't something that she was going to ever act on. So fear of harm and harming other people is sometimes an obsession that we often don't think about, or we might think that Maybe this means somebody is delusional, for example. But this could just be OCD. So we all have had intrusive thoughts. They come up. People have intrusive thoughts in a lot of different ways. Might have, just something just kind of pop up in our head and we're like, I don't know, like, oh, did I just, what was that bump in the road? Oh, this must be, I hit somebody with my car, for example. But why does it happen for some people that they can just kind of move on from that intrusive thought and say, no, that's not actually true? Or why does it turn into an obsession? So some of the ways are that they have some sort of appraisal or thought about the thought, right? What do the thoughts mean? So if instead of saying like, oh, that was weird, I instead said, oh, that must mean that I actually did hurt somebody, or maybe I want to hurt somebody, right? How important are the thoughts? So I might give it a lot of weight and really start thinking about it. Oh my gosh, I really have this thought about harming somebody. And also if it's intrusive, right? It keeps coming up, so this must mean something to me. Is it also threatening to myself or to other people? It might be threatening to my self-concept of like, I'm not somebody that hurt somebody. So the fact that I have this thought is really threatening. And another thing is about how can you cope with that thought, right? So for some people that might mean just checking, right? So, oh, I need to turn my car around and go see if I actually did hurt somebody on the road. And in other ways, the coping might be kind of doing some of these ritualistic behaviors. So I like this comic down here. And to read it. I personally have the fear of harming others. I wanted to be a doctor when I grew up, but my OCD started to take over when I was 10 and it took my dream away. In middle school, I was too scared to make friends. I thought I was bad for having these bad thoughts and that I didn't deserve friends, right? So this person is appraising their thoughts about this harm as something really negative and that this person couldn't be friends with other people. So it really has a lot of importance and it is really threatening. So there are a couple of different things that people do to try to neutralize or stop that thought. And there are things like thought suppressions, just trying to, not think about the elephant in the room. And oftentimes it makes it actually worse because we're thinking about it a lot. There's the behavioral compulsion, so things like excessive hand washing, things like checking things a certain number of times, right? We have also rituals. So if I do this, this, and this, then that thought will go away. And oftentimes people talk about it as being feeling just right. So that you need to do things in a certain way or in a certain form. And when you get it right, it feels right. And then you can stop the ritual. I will post there's a really great video of kids talking about their OCD. And some of that is really great to demonstrate how these rituals kind of take over. And the different types of compulsions there might be there. And there might just be avoidance, right? So I might avoid everything that reminds me of germs. So in that video you'll watch, one of the children is afraid of germs and contamination. So anything that has touched something that is contaminated, they avoid it. So she avoided all trees because there was once a weird bottle that was underneath a tree. And so now all trees are contaminated by that weird bottle. So when we have OCD, you'll have obsessions, and that creates some sort of anxiety. So the distressing image happens. I'm really scared about what that may mean about me. I start feeling anxious about it, and so I do some sort of compulsion to give myself some relief. And this is just temporary though, right? So this relief comes but which then maintains it, right? So it's a negative reinforcement cycle that we have going on here, where they will increase the obsessions, right? So the next time the obsession comes back, then you do that compulsion, which gives you some more relief, but then you have to do it for longer or more times, right? So this is really a negative reinforcement cycle. So it's pretty similar to what we see in anxiety disorders.